You find out because of a nosebleed.
Not yours, your daughter's. She's 7 years old, sitting at the kitchen table eating cereal, and the blood just arrives. No warning, no impact. It drips onto the cartoon on the back of the cereal box, and she looks at it with the calm curiosity of a child who doesn't yet understand that her body is trying to tell her something important.
You hand her a paper towel. You tilt her head forward the way your mother taught you. You tell her it's nothing. Kids get nosebleeds. Except this is the fourth one this month. And last month there were 3. And the month before that, your neighbor, Mrs. Calloway's son, was diagnosed with a rare form of childhood leukemia that his oncologist described as unusual for his age group. And the month before that, your other neighbor, Dale, lost his wife to a neurological condition her doctors couldn't fully explain. And the year before that, your best friend from high school, who still lives 4 blocks away in the house he grew up in, buried his father at 58 from liver failure in a man who never drank. You live in Harlan Pines, a subdivision in southern Illinois that was developed in 1987 by a company called Meridian Residential Partners. Quiet streets, mature trees, good school district. The kind of neighborhood where people leave their garage doors open and nobody steals anything, and the biggest drama is whose dog got into whose trash. You moved here 11 years ago because it was affordable and safe, and because the elementary school had a rating that made your wife cry with relief. You put down roots the way people do when they stop running from something and start building towards something. You planted a garden, you coached Little League. You know every family on your street by name and medical history, it turns out, without ever meaning to. You don't think about any of this as a pattern until the nosebleed. Then you think about nothing else. You start with the internet the way everyone starts. You search leukemia clusters Illinois and get academic papers you can't fully parse, and news articles from other states in a CDC database that requires knowing exactly what to ask before it tells you anything useful. You search Harlan Pines Environmental and get real estate listings in a local Facebook group where someone is selling a lawnmower. Then you search Meridian Residential Partners. The company dissolved in 1994, 7 years after building your neighborhood. You find a corporate filing, a registered agent address in Springfield that no longer exists, and a single paragraph in a 1993 business journal about Meridian's parent company restructuring its real estate holdings. The parent company is called Veltane Group. Veltane Group is still active. You know that name. Everyone in southern Illinois knows that name. Veltane operates the largest chemical manufacturing facility in the county, 12 miles from Harlan Pines. They employ 2,400 people. They sponsored the new wing of the regional hospital. Their logo is on the scoreboard at the high school football stadium. They are, by every visible measure, a pillar of the community that exists on top of whatever they buried underneath it. You call the county health department. You explain that you've noticed an unusual number of serious illnesses among residents of your neighborhood. The woman on the phone is polite and thorough and tells you that illness clusters are often statistical artifacts, that human brains are pattern recognition machines that find shapes in randomness, and that if you have specific concerns, you can submit a formal inquiry which will be reviewed within 90 business days. 90 business days. Your daughter had 4 nosebleeds this month. You submit the inquiry. You also start keeping a spreadsheet. The spreadsheet begins with your street and expands outward block by block as you talk to neighbors under the cover of small talk and community concern. You're not lying exactly. You are concerned. You're just concerned about something specific that you don't name yet, because naming it out loud makes it real in a way you're not ready for while you're still standing in someone's driveway pretending to ask about their summer plans. Within 3 weeks, you have 47 households. Within 6 weeks, you have 112. You map the data: cancer diagnoses, neurological conditions, autoimmune disorders, miscarriages. You note ages at diagnosis. You note durations of residence. You note proximity to the drainage creek that runs along the eastern edge of the subdivision, the one the developer's brochure called a natural water feature, and the kids call the Green Creek because of the color it turns after heavy rain. The pattern is not subtle once you can see it. Households within 2 blocks of the creek have a diagnosis rate 4 times higher than households on the western edge of the subdivision. The creek runs along the back of 38 properties. Every single one of those 38 households has at least one
serious illness in the last decade. 38 for 38. That is not a statistical artifact. You contact an environmental lawyer in Chicago named Patricia Osei. She specializes in toxic tort cases. She has handled 7 cluster litigations in her career, won 4, settled 2, and lost 1 when the defendant successfully argued the science was inconclusive. She listens to your spreadsheet over the phone without interrupting you. When you finish, she's quiet for a moment. Then she says, "Send me everything." What she sends back 3 weeks later is a document you read 4 times before you understand what you're looking at. She hired an environmental investigator who pulled state geological survey records, EPA inspection logs, and historical land use filings going back to 1971. Before Meridian Residential Partners broke ground on Harlan Pines in 1987, the land was an industrial waste disposal site operated by a company called Crestfield Chemical Works. Between 1961 and 1983, Crestfield disposed of chemical manufacturing byproducts on that land. The specific compounds include trichloroethylene, perchloroethylene, benzene, and a proprietary solvent compound designated in internal documents only as Compound 7. When Crestfield ceased operations in 1983, the site was sold. State environmental records show a remediation assessment was conducted in 1985. The assessment concluded the site met minimum standards for residential development. The assessment was conducted by an environmental consulting firm called Lakeland Environmental Services. Lakeland Environmental Services was a wholly owned subsidiary of Beltane Group. The company assessed its own contamination and cleared its own land for residential development, and then sold that land through a subsidiary to a residential developer that had also controlled and built 340 homes on top of a chemical waste site, and then dissolved the residential subsidiary and restructured its corporate holdings in a way that placed 2 layers of corporate separation between Beltane and anything that happened in Harlan Pines before anyone moved in. The people who built your neighborhood knew what was underneath it. They knew before the first foundation was poured. They knew when they ran the brochures with the photographs of mature trees and the natural water feature. They knew when they sold your house to the couple you bought it from, who knew nothing, who sold it to you in good faith, who handed you a disclosure form that said no known environmental hazards, which was technically accurate because the knowledge was buried in a subsidiary that no longer existed.
I've lived in this house for 11 years. Your daughter was born here. She has lived her entire life above a chemical waste site that a corporation decided was an acceptable location for a subdivision because the remediation would have cost more than the land was worth. And the statute of limitations on certain environmental liabilities runs out in ways that a good lawyer can architect around if you structure the corporate entities correctly. Patricia tells you the case is strong. She also tells you what strong means in toxic tort litigation. It means years. It means Beltane's legal team, which is large and well-funded and has handled this kind of thing before, will challenge your science, your data, your methodology, your causation chain. They will hire their own epidemiologists who will produce studies finding no statistically significant correlation. They will depose every doctor who treated every sick person in your spreadsheet. They will make the process so expensive and exhausting that some of your neighbors will settle individually for amounts that require signing non-disclosure agreements, which will reduce your plaintiff pool, which will weaken the case, which is the strategy. She's seen it before. She knows how it ends more often than it should. You take the information public anyway, not through the lawsuit. Through the local newspaper, a weekly called the Harlan County Courier that has one full-time reporter named James Whitfield who covers everything from city council meetings to high school sports scores and has been at the paper for 19 years, and is the kind of journalist who still believes that local news is the last institution standing between a community and the people who would prefer the community didn't ask questions. James spends 6 weeks verifying what you've given him. He pulls the same records Patricia's investigator pulled. He gets a retired EPA official on background who confirms that the 1985 assessment methodology was inadequate by the standards of the time and would not meet current requirements. He contacts Veltane's communications department for comment and receives a written statement saying the company takes environmental responsibility seriously, has no record of any current or former subsidiary operating on the land in question, and notes that any claims regarding historical contamination would be a matter for the relevant regulatory agencies. The story runs on a Thursday. By Friday, it's been picked up by 3 regional outlets. By the following Monday, it's national. Cable news runs the creek footage James shot on his phone, the green water catching the light in a way that looks almost beautiful until you know what you're looking at. Your spreadsheet becomes a graphic. The 38 for 38 statistic is on television. Veltane's stock drops 4% in 2 days. Their communications team releases a second statement calling the reporting irresponsible and scientifically illiterate. 3 state legislators call for an investigation. The EPA announces it is reviewing historical records related to the site. The Illinois Attorney General's office contacts Patricia. Mrs. Calloway's son is 8 years old and in his second round of chemotherapy. The investigation takes 14 months. The findings, when they arrive, are careful and bureaucratic and confirm what you already know in language so hedged and qualified that Veltane's lawyers can point to individual sentences and argue they constitute exoneration, while the whole document, read completely, says the opposite. The remediation was inadequate. The contamination is real. The link between specific compounds and specific diagnoses meets the threshold of scientific plausibility, but falls short of the legal standard of established causation, which is a distinction that means everything in a courtroom and nothing to the people it affects. Veltane settles the class action 14 months after that. The amount is not disclosed. Each plaintiff household receives a payment that Patricia describes as meaningful, but that does not approach what full accountability would require. Everyone signs a non-disclosure agreement as a condition of settlement. You sign it. Patricia tells you it's the right decision given the costs of continuing to trial and the uncertainty of the outcome and the needs of 340 families who have been living with this for 3 years now and need resolution more than they need principle. She's right. You sign it. The remediation of Harlan Pines begins the following spring. It will take 4 years, the engineers estimate. Residents are offered temporary relocation assistance. Most of the neighborhood empties out. The mature trees are felled for soil access. The natural water feature is drained and excavated. The Green Creek is gone. The playground equipment at the end of your street is removed. The Little League field where you coach for 6 seasons is cordoned off with orange fencing and environmental warn. Your daughter's nosebleeds stop 3 months after you move into the temporary apartment across town. Her pediatrician says this is encouraging. She says it carefully, the way doctors learn to say things that are true without being everything. You drive past Harlan Pines sometimes. You're not sure why. The streets are mostly empty. The houses sit there looking exactly like houses. The same siding, the same driveways, the same mailboxes with the same family names on them. From the street, it looks like a neighborhood that's simply waiting for people to come back. It doesn't look like a crime scene. It doesn't look like anything until you know what's underneath it. That's what you keep thinking about, how long it looked like nothing. 11 years you lived there, and the ground beneath your foundation was doing what it had been doing since 1961, quietly, invisibly, at a rate slow enough that any individual data point looked like coincidence. A nosebleed, a diagnosis, a funeral that seemed early but not impossible. The pattern was always there. It just required someone to decide that a pattern was worth looking for. Veltane still operates the facility 12 miles away. They employ 2,400 people. Their logo is still on the scoreboard at the high school football stadium. They paid a fine as part of the settlement agreement with the state, an amount that Patricia quietly described to you as less than 3 weeks of the facility's operating profit. They issued a statement expressing regret for any harm that may have been caused by historical operations and affirming their commitment to community health and environmental stewardship. The word may is doing a lot of work in that sentence. Mrs. Calloway's son finished his treatment last October. He's in remission. She sent you a text with a photograph of him at school, first day back, backpack on, grinning in the specific way of a child who has been through something terrible and come out the other side. and doesn't yet fully understand either part. You save the photograph. You look at it sometimes when you're not sure why you spent 3 years of your life doing what you did, when the NDA feels like a seal over something that deserved more air, when the settlement amount feels like arithmetic applied to things that shouldn't have a number. Then you look at the photograph, a kid with a backpack, still here. That wraps it up for today. This story is fictional, but environmental contamination cover-ups and residential toxic exposure cases have occurred across the United States, from Woburn, Massachusetts to Hinckley, California, to countless communities where the gap between what corporations knew and what they disclosed was measured not in oversight, but in calculation. If this one sat differently, drop a comment and tell me honestly, would you have signed the NDA? Because if the answer is no, this story isn't about a neighborhood in Illinois. It's about what we accept when justice arrives in installments and accountability comes with conditions. Subscribe for more. See you in the next one.